Hey guys, it's me, Minu, back with another video, another Attack on Titan video. I didn't show you my shirt in the last thing. You probably thought I was wearing a regular shirt. It does look weird though, but this is the shirt. So it's really cool, and I like it. But I'm gonna finish. As you can tell, that it's the same day as my last video. Sorry, last video was longer than I wanted it to, but man, I love this show so much. I love this show so freaking much. And there's so much to talk about. There's so much to talk about. So what I'm gonna try to do as I continue taking down my hair, um, is I'm going to talk about kind of like the overall plot of the story. One of the things that I've hated about timeline videos that I've just been seeing over and over and over again is that they don't give you the actual timeline, like the canonical timeline. They give you the timeline as if you were watching the show, but the show literally starts with to you 2,000 years from now. So you already know that this is not the story is not linear. It's really more circular. But it's not a linear, like, this is the beginning, this is the middle, this is the end. Attack on Titan don't do that. Attack on Titan gives you a lot of foreshadowing. They give you a lot of flash forwards. They really don't tell the story in a super linear way. I like them for that because then it gives my brain something to chew on. But they don't tell the story in a super linear way. 2,000 years before the first episode, um, this little girl in this little village named, and I don't even know if her name is actually Ymir. That's another thing that I have a question on because I don't know. I don't think her name is actually Ymir because how would she have ever told anybody her name? Okay, let me just go. Let me just start with let me just all the questions, right? All the questions. Anyway, in the show, her name is Ymir. So she's this little girl. I gotta say, like, what is she? If I had to guess, I'd be, let's say, somewhere between like 8 and 10. When we see her later standing next to, I think, like the 8-year-old Aaron, they're like the same height and they're like holding hands and stuff. So I feel like she might be around like 8 years old, but she's like living in her little farm, her little village, on working on a farm and all that stuff. When the Eldians, led by King Fritz, show up, and they're just doing their thing, right? They're like Mongolians, they're like the Han. They're coming through, they're killing everybody, they're taking people as slaves, they're burning down the villages. And so she ends up being taken as a slave. Now, what they do to these slaves is they cut out their tongues, which is why I was like, how would anyone have ever known her name was Ymir? I ain't never seen this bitch talk because she ain't got no tongue. So I think that I think actually King Fritz probably just named her Ymir, which adds into a whole nother thing. But basically, she lives there and she is working the farm. And then one day she feels bad for these pigs and she releases them. So, in order for people to avoid punishment, the other slaves decide to rat her out. And there's this whole thing about the symbolism of the fact that it was 13 slaves that ratted her out, but I'll get back to that in a second. They rat her out. So, as punishment for letting out the pigs, King First is like, "Oh, you're free." And by you're free, he means we're gonna hunt you down like an animal. So they're chasing after her with horses and dogs, and they're shooting her with arrows. And poor thing's just running for her life, badly injured, trying not to die. When she stumbles into the opening of this huge fucking tree that's just out there in the forest, and while she's there, she comes into contact with something called the source of all living matter, the hallucinogenia, and it attaches itself to her spine, and she becomes a giant titan. The I would say the biggest titan in history. All the other titans that come after her are significantly smaller than her, including the colossal titan. But she becomes this titan. But instead of her destroying the Eldian kingdom and killing King Fritz, she decides to go back to him and, be his slave again. I'm assuming some kind of like mental thing of like, I shouldn't have disobeyed you or gone against you. I'm so sorry, even though I'm more powerful than you now. And so he accepts her back and uses her basically as a war machine to help him defeat all of his enemies and continue conquering people and enslaving people. And I don't know at this point how many years she was under his reign before she came back. So I don't understand the whole psychological part of it. But again, Amir's tongue was cut out when she was first became a slave. So it's not like she was ever going to be like, here's my backstory, readers. Hey, Aaron, here's my backstory. She didn't talk to anybody. She never talks the whole show because she doesn't have a tongue. Even though it's very likely that when she became a Titan, all of her injuries healed and her tongue grew back, she still never spoke. And that's on being a slave. So he uses her to conquer all of these nations, kill millions of people. She helps build roads. She helps build up his kingdom. And he goes from being just like a run-of-the-mill warlord to being an actual king of the Eldian kingdom. And as a reward for this, he decides, okay, you're powerful and you're a slave, so have my babies. He makes her have her kids. She goes along with it because what else is she going to do? And she gives birth to 3 kids. Sena, Maria, and I forgot the other girl's name. But she gives birth to 3 daughters of his. And literally he just uses her to have his kids. I'm pretty sure at some point he probably continued to use her as a war machine even when she was pregnant, and so she probably lost more kids than is actually shown in the show. I'm just filling in gaps here mentally as somebody who's seen all the way to the end. But 3 of the kids survive and went 13 years after she becomes a Titan. So who knows how many years she's been with him at this point, but 13 years after becoming a Titan, someone tries to assassinate him, as they should, and literally she jumps in front of it to save him. But instead of her getting back up and healing from the wounds, because let's be honest, she's been injured multiple times working as this man's war machine and concubine. Instead of getting up, she decides to give up and die. But she doesn't actually like die, because then she goes into this place called the Paths, which is this big sandy space looking place that you see in the show over and over again. And by the end of the show, you've seen it like 50 million times, right? But she ends up going into this place. And so because she dies, he freaks out and he's like, I can't lose this power. Because again, he doesn't care about it. He just wants the power. I can't lose this power. So he makes her young daughters. Because again, remember, she's only been a Titan for 13 years. And it took a few years after she became a Titan before he decided to make her a concubine and have his babies. So these are young girls. And he makes them eat their mother. And they inherit the powers of the Titan. So he has his war machine back. He has 3 war machines now. And then as he is on his deathbed, he tells his daughters, hey, keep doing that thing where y'all eat each other so that this kingdom can remain powerful. But this also creates a very interesting thing in the story of the divide amongst the Eldians, because the people who are descendants of Ymir, who have Ymir's blood in them, are called subjects of Ymir. But not all subjects of Ymir are Eldians, because the Eldian kingdom existed way, way before Ymir ever became a slave or became a Titan or became not the wife, but the concubine of King Fritz. So all of those people that were there were Eldians. All of those people in the army, the other women that King Fritz was sleeping with, all of them were Eldians, but they didn't have Ymir's blood in them. It was only Ymir's descendants who had her blood, and it was only those people who were able to turn into Titans. It was not something that she could have just gave to somebody else. I hear Sadie in there eating more food, sneaking more food. So you have this weird divide. Over time, over the next 2,000 years, the majority of Eldians have Ymir's blood in them, because every 13 years, they are the people who have the Titan powers that come from Ymir, which makes them shifters versus pure Titans. They can shift in and out of their Titan form. The people who have this ability die after 13 years of having this ability. And because of that, it was discovered that when they die, someone randomly who would be born with the Titan shifter ability. So in order to prevent this from being a random thing and keep it more of we're a war machine, this is what we do, they would literally just after 13 years, Sadie, get out, Sadie. Let me go get her. As I was saying, they realize that they don't want it to be random who becomes a shifter and who becomes like a regular pure titan. So they, at every 13 years, the titan shifter has to be eaten by another subject of Ymir in order to inherit that power. So it becomes like considered like a curse, right? Like once you become a titan shifter, you only have 13 years to live. And eventually there becomes multiple royal families who all have Ymir's blood, who all have the power of the Titans, and they end up going to war with each other. It's called the Great Titan War. But now Marley comes into the picture because they are, if you want to make comparisons to our real life, they are like the marginalized people. They are, heavily prosecuted and oppressed by the Eldian Empire. And, eventually you get to, I don't know, it's hard to keep calling him King Fritz, right? You get to one of the kings, I guess, who realizes like, we've treated the Marleyans so horribly and we need to atone for our sins by basically dying out. So he takes his founding titan. He has the founding titan. So the king usually has the founding titan at this point. And he takes as many Eldians as possible to the island of Paradis and wipes their memory and makes them think that all the other titans in the world, that all the other humans in the world are dead and it's nothing but titans. And they aren't titans. The titans are just this magical, natural phenomenon that happened that is just killing people left and right. But that's basically what happens. He feels so bad for the horrors that the Eldians have done over the past, 1,900 years, the 1,500 years. He feels so bad that he thinks the only way for this to end is for them to go to Paradis so that he and his people, the people he know and the people he care about, can live out the rest of their days behind these huge ass walls so that they can't be easily killed, but also with the understanding that at some point the rest of the world is going to come and kill them anyway because they're mad about the way that they've done the world. So in this story, if you were to compare it historically, the Eldians are kind of similar to like the Mongolians and the Huns, or even like Europeans who they have colonized so much of the world. They are very imperialist power. They have oppressed so much of the world. They've killed so many millions of people. They've destroyed economies. They've enslaved millions of people. Everyone hates them, but they are still a superpower, so no one can stop them. And it literally takes one of the leaders being like, oh my God, we're awful. Let's just isolate ourselves and then, I'll live out my days in peace. I got a few years left. I live out my days in peace. The people I care about will live out their days in peace. They will grow old and die. And then after that, whatever happens, happens. It doesn't really matter. He just wanted his people to live out their days in peace. But in so doing so, and rushing to everybody to the island, he left a good chunk of Eldians or subjects of Ymir. I don't really want to keep saying Eldians because that's not fully accurate. But he left a good chunk of subjects of Ymir, meaning his people with his bloodline, outside of the walls, off the island, in Marley. Now, Marley in the show is, at that point in the show, is presented as this, they've basically become their own enemy. Like they've become their oppressors because they took the tools of their oppressors and used it to oppress everybody else. Now, I don't know if y'all have heard this phrase, but when they say the master's tools can never dismantle the master's house, that's basically what this show is showing you with Marley, because Marley goes from being this oppressed people who were, devastated and enslaved by the Eldian kingdom to obtaining almost damn near every fucking Titan shifter outside of the founding Titan. And the other part too is like he does do this whole like, if you ever try to attack us, like all of the colossal Titans that we use to build the wall will come out and they'll destroy the world. But he didn't really mean it. And it's kind of like, I feel like the Tiber family, who also sided with Marley, I felt like they knew he didn't mean it. Because why would you If you wanted to destroy the world, you would just destroy the world. Like, why would you build all these walls and hide behind them? Like, people who really about that action ain't about to do that. So they kind of knew already that they was lying, but they needed time to build up their armies and build up titans that they had and do their titan science and experiment on the subjects of Ymir that the king left behind when they all went to Paradis, and oppress those people, because in their minds it's revenge, right? It's literally like if in America, after slavery ended, all of the African descendants decided that they was going to take all the power and enslave white people. And now you have kind of the same thing happening, but it's just flip-flopped, and people feel differently about whether it's the right thing to do or not because of the fact that they were previously oppressed. So that's the whole thing with Marley. They were oppressed by the Eldians, and now that the Eldians is gone and they just left this group behind, we're going to oppress these Eldians because we got to get our lick back. And the show is trying to show you something, it's trying to tell you something, but I feel like a lot of people don't catch it. Like, I feel like a lot of people don't catch it. Like, they're just like, nope, screw Marley because the attack, the colossal titan and and all that stuff. They're not catching it because you're not following the story. No one's explaining to you the story by how the timeline is actually working. You see the story told in one way when you watch it. But then when you dig into it and you look at the timeline and how actually things happen, it paints a completely different picture. Now, it's not to say that anyone's right or wrong. That's the whole thing of the show. Nobody's right or wrong in anything. But it's a cycle of violence and oppression and imperialism and colonialism that is continuing all of everybody's suffering. So they experiment on the people with Ymir's blood for centuries, and they use them as their warhammers. They do exactly what the Eldians did. They take these people, they enslave them, and then they use them to fight in their wars. My hair is already starting to dry. And they do this, and they also do propaganda to convince these people that you should be suffering and you should be dying for us. You should be giving us your children to use in our experiments because of how awful Eldia was. And